Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
I've come to this place where it all began to speak as plainly as I can to the nation about the threats we face, about the power we have in our own hands to meet these threats, and about the incredible future that lies in front of us if only we choose it. Too much of what's happening in our country today is not normal. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. Now, I want to be very clear up front. Not every Republican, not even the majority of Republicans are MAGA Republicans. Not every Republican embraces their extreme ideology. MAGA forces are determined to take this country backwards to an America where there is no right to choose, no right to privacy, no right to contraception, no right to marry who you love. They promote authoritarian leaders and they fan the flames of political violence that are a threat to our personal rights, to the pursuit of justice, to the rule of law, to the very soul of this country. That's why tonight I'm asking our nation to come together, unite behind the single purpose of defending our democracy regardless of your ideology. We're all called by duty and conscience to confront extremists who put their own pursuit of power above all else. Democrats, independents, mainstream Republicans, we must be stronger, more determined, and more committed to saving American democracy than MAGA Republicans are to destroying American democracy. We, the people, will not let anyone or anything tear us apart. I will not stand by and watch. I will not, the will of the American people, be overturned by wild conspiracy theories and baseless evidence-free claims of fraud. I will not stand by and watch elections in this country stolen by people who simply refuse to accept that they lost. I will not stand by and watch the most fundamental freedom in this country, the freedom to vote, and have your vote counted and be taken from you and the American people. So speak up, speak out, get engaged, vote, vote, vote. And if we do our duty in 2022 and beyond, then ages still to come will say, we, all of us here, we kept the faith. We preserved democracy. We are the United States of America, the United States of America. And may God protect our nation, and may God protect all those who stand watch over our democracy. God bless you all. Democracy. Thank you.
America's long war with the left. Welcome to Training Tuesday again on the Rob Maness Show live on the X Spaces simulcast. Well, from the American War for Independence, the French Revolution, the Whiskey Rebellion in the early days of our constitutional republic, and as you can see, up through today, the left is America's oldest enemy. In his book, Domestic Enemies, the Founding Fathers Fight Against the Left, Daniel Greenfield shows us that it was here long before the 1960s, calling for the execution of George Washington, plotting to stop the ratification of the Constitution, collaborating with foreign enemies. stolen elections, fake news, race riots, globalism, and socialism are not new problems. Americans face them from the very beginning. Domestic enemies shows the true origins of the Democratic Party and its radicals, who even 2 centuries ago were calling for the redistribution of wealth, the end of marriage, the use of schools for political indoctrination. From political battles to street fights, domestic enemies takes you into the heart of a century of forgotten struggles between America's greatest heroes like George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Davy Crockett, and Abraham Lincoln, and radical villains like Aaron Burr. Well, my guest today is Daniel Greenfield. He's a journalist at Front Page Magazine. He's executive vice president of programs at the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and he's the author of Domestic Enemies, the Founding Fathers' Fight Against the Left. Daniel, welcome to Rob Maness Show.
Thank you so much.
Well, hey, sir, I mean, this is who we are today. Joe Biden, you just saw that. Tyrants like that have the power now. And he just demonized in that speech, as you know, and the audience knows, half of the American people. And we're the half that believes in the foundations of the Declaration of Independence and wants to save the constitutional republic. How the heck did we get here, I guess, is the starting off question of our discussion today.
That's exactly the problem. We do believe in the Constitution. We do believe in the Declaration of Independence, and that's why we're a threat to democracy. And you have to talk about where does this notion that they keep talking about the sacred democracy. I mean, he pretty much says, God bless America, and then democracy. Democracy is as God. Where does this obsession with democracy come from? So in Domestic Enemies, one of the things I actually trace is where this obsession with democracy came from. It actually came out of the French Revolution. And the French Revolution, unlike the American Revolution, was about enforcing DI. Back then, it was about eliminating any kind of distinctions, mandating equity, making sure that there would be redistribution of wealth. Everyone would have just as much. And they imported this to America under the guise of democratic principles. And the French agents of the French Revolution actually set up democratic societies backed by American leftists. And those democratic societies eventually merged into what became the Democratic Republican Party. The Republican part of the party was the moderate, the liberals, and the Democratic part were the extremists. And eventually that's where the Democratic Party comes from. So this idea of democracy, which the Founding Fathers understood was mob rule, it was an attempt to impose radical views on the public. That is what the Democrats are now fighting to impose on us.
Yeah, you go into a pretty good level of detail about the French Revolution and where this notion of the left and the right came from, Daniel, and that these people really don't believe in the individual right to be happy and freedom and those kind of things. It's only through the means of the state is what the outgrowth of the French Revolution was. And how did that get brought to here and with the creation of these democratic societies? But how did those ideas get brought to here to take hold?
There was always a battle between the idea of the American Revolution and the French Revolution. The American Revolution was about returning power to the people, not about having this large government that would change society. The French Revolution was a leftist revolution. It's exactly what Biden is talking about now. We're going to create this ideal society, not by honoring the individual, but by making sure that society reflects the values that they want. And those values today might be abortion and gay rights. Back then it was redistribution of wealth, abolition of religion, but it was going to reflect those values. And there were people in America, leftists, who always really wanted that. They wanted this ideal utopian society, and they were willing to kill to get it. And back in George Washington's day, he actually had to fight them off. At one point, he becomes the only president, as far as I know, who actually leads troops in the field to deal with one of these leftist uprisings. But it's a battle that's continued on for 200 years. We're still having this argument today. Does freedom, does liberty mean that each of us gets to live our own lives, make our own decisions? Or does it mean that we have a government that is going to create this perfect society for us? Does it mean the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Or does it mean the imposition of happiness by the government?
Yeah, you'll be happy, and you'll be happy in the way the government says you'll be happy. Is the way I understood what you wrote in your book. the interesting thing is that the French Revolution was all about death. You know, that every time they needed to make a change and move forward, they killed off the previous revolutionaries until eventually, you know, with Robespierre and all those folks, they're killing off all of their revolutionaries to the point where they're eliminating them, and they have to try something different. That's kind of what's been going on in this country all the way up to today. That's why I started out with the Biden clip there, because I mean, we are living this right now. I mean, it may not be as bad as the blood in the streets of the French Revolution, but when you look at the mobs from the summer of 2020 to today with the Hamas Nazi supporters, that people supporting atrocities on Jewish civilians and babies and rapes and publicly harming corpses and parading people through the streets, taking hostages, there is a connection there that flows all the way through from what you write about in the book. Am I right?
Absolutely. And if you look at those campus speeches, the Hamas supporters, they're talking about bringing this to America. They keep talking about intifada, worldwide revolution. And they say that destroying Israel is a pathway to destroying America. So they absolutely want to bring this here. And part of what we're seeing on campuses is really the same phenomenon you just described. It's the leftists going after the liberals, the people who are further left going after the people who are not as far left. The same thing happened in the Soviet Union. The same thing happened in communist China, because the vision of the founding fathers was you were going to actually free individuals to pursue their own means. But if you're going to have a strong state that is going to impose its will, the only way you know how to settle those arguments is by killing your political opponents. Eventually, as in the French Revolution, the Soviet Revolution, and the Chinese Communist Revolution, and that's happening now, you're going to have to kill each other because there's no other way to settle disputes.
Very interesting. We have something called the Second Amendment, and we still have the Constitution, although it's not being followed very well, in my opinion. Well, we have a live audience, and I do take a question every segment from the audience, Daniel. We've got a hand up over there. Our host is Patriot Rob. Go ahead, Rob. Who's got their hand up? What's the question?
AJ. Hi, Colonel. Hi, Daniel. I just wanted to let you know I ordered your book, and I'm looking forward to reading it. AJ, go ahead, my friend.
Thank you for the mic. Thank you, Colonel. I just have a question. Thomas Jefferson was highly involved in French Revolution, its drafting of it, and he's also in the Assembly Nationale when it was proclaimed in France. And he had an affinity for the French Revolution, which later he got corrected on his views and just distanced himself from it. The question is, do you think in long term this American association by the via of Thomas Jefferson has basically backfired and stained part of our history? Thank you.
Well, Thomas Jefferson did initially sympathize with the French Revolution. As the casualties, Thomas Paine is actually scheduled for execution at one point. He only survives because they put the death mark on the wrong side of his cell door. Lafayette, who there's a deep relationship with, ends up also in disfavor. And by the time Thomas Jefferson becomes president, he strikes a deal. He disavows foreign entanglements, following up on really the position of George Washington, which was Democratic Republicans opposed at the time. But Jefferson maintains the Embargo Act. He maintains the idea that the United States is not going to join with either England or the French Revolution. There are a lot of radicals who feel like he betrayed them. They're very angry at him. But Thomas Jefferson, really like a lot of during the Cold War, came around and saw really that this revolution is not the redemption of humanity. It's not a better way. It's actually just an endless tide of blood. And he learned that the United States should not be involved in that. And there were plenty of liberals who, during the Cold War, had that same reaction. Hopefully there'll be some liberals who are waking up today and seeing what's going on campuses and elsewhere are going to have their own Thomas Jefferson moment.
Yeah, that's good news. I mean, even the key to the Bastilles hangs in Mount Vernon. So, Lafayette gave that to George Washington. It's my understanding from that story. But that was early on in this, I think. Yes. As time went on and you saw the blood in the streets, I mean, there's no way an American that believes in the founding values and the Declaration of Independence would support that because we believe in individual rights to go after happiness without the interference of the state, and the French Revolution was exactly the opposite. Well, We got to take our first commercial break, Daniel. When we come back, I want to dive into a little bit more on the Whiskey Rebellion and who started that, who was integral to that, because it's a fascinating story I didn't know about in my study of American history. And then I want to talk about America's first community organizer type political leader that did a lot of these leftist activities all the way back in the earliest days of the country. We'll be right back with the Rob Maness Show Live.
I'm excited to announce we're having a huge MyPillow spring sale, and here's a few examples. Buy one of our MyPillow 2.0s, you get another MyPillow 2.0 absolutely free. Made with cooling technology, the best pillow ever just got even better. And this just in, 9 brand new colors and styles of our Percale bed sheets. They're made with the finest long staple cotton, and now you can save 50% or more. That's as low as $24.98. And for the first time this year, I'm bringing you our My Slippers and Sandals for as low as $25 a pair. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get your MyPillow 2.0s. Buy one, get one free. Percale sheets as low as $24.98. My Slippers and Sandals as low as $25 a pair. And for a limited time, when you order $75 or more, your entire order ships absolutely free.
Here for the Whiskey Rebellion Festival. I'm in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It's been 4 long years since the passing of the excise tax, and we've already learned how the rebels farmers in western Pennsylvania have resisted the tax, failed to pay the tax, tarred and feathered tax collectors, burned the homes of tax collectors. So finally, this gentleman, George Washington, calls out the rebels in western Pennsylvania as being opposed to the U.S. government. And this guy, Alexander Hamilton, convinces him that the only way to put down the rebellion is to send troops into western Pennsylvania. So it's here in the fall of 1794 that George Washington and Alexander Hamilton meet the militias from Pennsylvania and New Jersey to march west to put down the rebellion. It's the first time a sitting president, and only time, has led troops in the field. And it's also the first time that militia, federal militia, are used against the citizens of the United States.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. We're live on X-Spaces simulcast with our guest, author of the new book, Domestic Enemies, The Founding Fathers Fight Against the Left. And it's a story about America's long war against the leftists in our population and around the world that want to destroy the concept of the constitutional republic. As a matter of fact, Daniel Greenfield is my guest today, the author of this great book. Daniel, you talk about how socialists took over in Rhode Island and tried to stop the Constitution before it was even out of the crib. How did that happen?
Idea of the Constitutional Convention, where everybody just came, they sat in the room, they worked everything out, and all the states went home, and the Constitution was ratified. That's not actually what happened. None of the states were in the room at the same time. There were people coming at different schedules. When they initially got the convention started, there were only a handful of states there. But there was one state that never actually showed up, never actually ratified the Constitution conventionally, and that was Rhode Island. Rhode Island had been taken over by a political movement called the Country Party, whose motto was to relieve the distressed. And their idea was they were going to print a whole lot of paper money and engage in wealth transfer by doing that. There's a lot of parallels to what's going on today. And it's one of the reasons why the Constitution actually forbids states printing their own currency. Because they not only printed their own currency, what they did was they passed laws forcing everyone to accept this currency, even though it was practically worthless. At one point, they actually passed laws stating that anyone who doesn't accept their currency will lose the right to vote. Even anybody who argues that people shouldn't accept the currency will lose the right to vote, will lose the right to run for public office. And they were dreaming of this vision of state-owned enterprises, their kind of own little socialist enclave in Rhode Island. The Constitution is ratified. George Washington becomes president of the United States, and Rhode Island is having meetings with the British and discussing the possible British presence in Rhode Island. At that point, they get an ultimatum. Either you're in or out. Either you ratify the Constitution, become part of the United States, or we just accept certain cities and divide the whole place up, or we actually go ahead and embargo your ports, or possibly both. And at that point, Rhode Island finally agrees very begrudgingly to join the United States. That's a part of history we've largely forgotten, but if the left had had its way, we would have either not had the full roster of states in the Union, or we might have actually had a civil war. And it was all about the exact policy that Biden is engaging in, which is printing inflationary currency to engage in wealth transfer.
Wow. And you mentioned the Whiskey Rebellion in the last segment. I showed that little clip there. The reason I picked that is because after reading what you wrote about, I realized that I don't know the history around that like I thought I did. And the clip kind of lays that out the way most Americans think about it. Hey, a bunch of farmers, making their own whiskey. They're having to pay this tax, and they got mad and started a rebellion. But that's not exactly the way the genesis of this happened, is it? Who were the people that really generated this rebellion and this insurrection? Really, first insurrection of the United States.
The Whiskey Rebellion is a messy situation. I'm sympathetic to anyone who's against taxes. However, it's really important to understand this in modern terms of how the left works. The left looks for people who may have legitimate grievances. Sometimes it's nonsense, but sometimes they will go to people who do have legitimate grievances. If you're against the government at a time when the left is not in power, they absolutely love you. The ACLU was set up at a time when the left was not in power, and they would go to anyone, including people on the right, who had grievances in order to weaponize them. And back then, I mentioned the democratic societies that had been set up by the French Revolution. These were really community organizing groups whose goal was to stir up trouble, to engage in initially protest any kind of disruption, and then eventually violence. And there was a democratic society in the Mingo Creek that was behind much of the Whiskey Rebellion. There were farmers who had legitimate grievances because America had these huge debts that had to be paid back for the Revolutionary War and for some of the messy governance after that, and the money had to come from all sorts of places, and there were legitimate arguments about that. But the Democratic Society and other leftists of the time came to people and they proposed various forms of insurrection. And George Washington actually becomes, yes, the only president who actually leads troops in the field. But it's important to remember George Washington's rationale in Domestic Enemies actually discuss what he writes in the letters. In the letters, he's not focusing on these people are not paying their taxes. He's discussing the fact that the democratic societies, he describes the democratic societies, which had been set up by an emissary of the French Revolution, were actually behind all this. And they had to actually stop all this because otherwise, first of all, foreign agents would be able to set off insurrections in the United States on a regular basis in order to seize power. And secondly, and I think this is an important quote, we will have an end to anything except mob and club government. And by mob government, he obviously meant mobs like in the French Revolution, or just the kind of thing we saw in 2020. And by club government, he meant you would have political parties, which is what we have now. You would have these clubs that would actually determine who was in power, which laws get obeyed. And that's really why he was out there, why he actually led troops in the field, because he saw mob and club government as the biggest threat. And these days we have mob and club government all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's why President Trump, when he was 45th president of the United States during the Summer of Love, the Black Lives Matter Marxist political violence that was going on in the name of George Floyd, and all kinds of other things. When they attacked the White House, I was recommending that he declare an insurrection because it had been going on for several, since May already all around the country. And these groups really were in rebellion of government and demanding changes, just like the French revolutionaries were, weren't they?
Yeah. There was no question this was an insurrection that it needed to be dealt with. And yes, they used this model over and over again. I call this the last 200-year war plus against America. They use mob violence. They get these mobs into the streets. Some of them may have legitimate grievances. Some of them may not. They get them in. They actually radicalize them. They engage in violence. Then they go after the centers of government. We were seeing that on an incredible scale just in some of the Western states, but we also saw this in D.C. when they actually go ahead and they besiege the White House. If that's not an insurrection, what is?
Yeah, exactly right. You mentioned Washington's warnings. I mean, I didn't realize that he had actually, in his addresses to Congress, I think the sixth one, he specifically talks about these societies, these democratic societies being created in secrecy and cloaked that way so that their true intentions might not be known until it's too late. This is well before he published his farewell address, which I want to talk about in the next segment in a little bit more detail. But these societies, you mentioned in the book, and I think I got it correct, that French people from the Revolution actually came to America and helped set these up in the colony, in the States.
The equivalent of the French ambassadors would interfere significantly in American politics, and their goal was to export the revolution, much like in the Soviet Union tried to export the communist revolution. So they would set up these organizations, these democratic societies. The name democratic actually came from the suggestion of the French ambassador, who was a man named Citizen Genet. And these organizations were, in some cases, in particular in southern states, they were actually trying to collect manpower, armed troops, and prepare to engage in conflicts on the borders. And others in major cities like Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, they were engaged in violence, in riots. Just mentioned the Whiskey Rebellion. The local Democratic Society was at the heart of all this. And George Washington saw the threat. He saw the threat, first of all, that these were agents of a foreign nation that were actually trying to engage in insurrection in the United States to subvert the government. And by the way, just to emphasize the extent to which they were interfering, Genet's successor is actually timing French attacks on American shipping with the proceedings of the Electoral College, and he's coordinating this with, and he writes this, with our friends in Congress. So they're specifically trying to influence the outcome of a presidential election by attacking merchant shipping, and they're plotting this alongside some members of Congress to determine how to best attack the United States in order to get a pro-French candidate as president.
Wow, that's incredible. So the leftists already had friends in Congress in those days, and those friends in Congress are helping external actors from another country, the French, to try to change or take over a presidential election?
Yeah, it's incredible. There's the quasi-war, which we kind of forget about, but in which American ships battled attacks from French privateers. And the attacks were not just random, they were timed specifically to get the American people, to get the Electoral College to make a decision. The thing is, it actually backfires. Jefferson warns that it is absolutely destructive and that it's actually producing the opposite of the results that the French had wanted, because the American people are not going to be bullied.
Yeah, and so the French are trying to export their version of the revolution. We've instituted a constitution to effectively not disrupt, but set the boundaries for a government that's come out of a revolution, which was different. That revolution was different in that way from the French Revolution, is that it was based on individual liberties primarily. I think, at least in the concepts that were written in the Declaration. So the constitutional government was constructed to try to stop this mob rule, but still institute enough of a democratic republic to carry forward those values. Do I have that right?
Well, the purpose of the mob is to seize control of the government. If you have a small government, it becomes much harder for the mob to seize control of it. That's one of the problems we have, why the left has been so thoroughly able to seize control of America, because we have created this massive big government. So the founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution, had different defense strategies. One of the simplest ones was to simply eliminate the thing that the mob wants to seize, because the mob is never actually about liberation. What they actually want to do is impose a totalitarian system. The mob claims that it's suffering oppression, that it's suffering from injustice, but it wants us to seize power so it can impose oppression and injustice on others. And the founding fathers made that hard to do in America.
Exactly. That's why we're still fighting it over 200 years later. And they haven't totally won yet, but I have to tell you, that's why I started out with the Biden clip there as president. We have some work to do to recover the constitutional republic the way it's supposed to be and wrest it away from the left before it goes too far. We've got to take our next break, Daniel. When we come back, I want to talk some more about the American left and George Washington's farewell address and this guy named Aaron Burr, because, again, some fascinating information that I knew a little bit, but I didn't know enough about the first community organizer at a senior leader level in the United States of America. And we'll be right back with Daniel Greenfield.
Consumers often ask, what should I expect when I take the Bella Grace elixir? And the answer's varied. It really depends on what your health and wellness needs are. I would consider this as your foundational core product for a whole range of health and wellness issues. Let me give you a few examples. If you're a little bit older and you have some joint health issues, some problems with mobility and discomfort, the elixir is going to be your best friend. If you have some skin health issues, wrinkles, hydration, aging, all of those elements are going to be benefited from the elixir, including age spots. Now, if you're in a younger demographic, maybe visual health is where you need some assistance. Eye fatigue, dry eyes, all of those are going to be benefited by the elixir. It's a core product because it benefits so many.
We have a vision of Washington today that's very distant. He seems almost sort of a figure off Mount Olympus, if not Mount Rushmore. And we think of him as being above the partisan fray, and as a result, he's lost a bit of his humanity. He was a very self-monitoring man. He understood very clearly the discipline of dignity, which is how he saw leadership, being a general. But that behind the mask of command that he very carefully cultivated, that particularly during his second term, that this was a man in pain, psychic pain, physical pain. He was becoming brittle and ill-tempered. He would go into furious rages, largely about the forces of partisanship that he could feel exploding even within his own cabinet. You know, here was a man with no sons, but his two most talented cabinet members, two surrogate sons, Jefferson and Hamilton, were warring with each other even within his own cabinet. And here Washington was trying to reconcile their divisions very actively. There was every indication that America might devolve into a civil war, that we could go the way other republics had in the past of being divided and our own worst enemy. And that's what Washington, based on his understanding of history, actively was trying to correct with the farewell address. So here was a man in full. And he brought all the aspects of his life into this speech. It was the sum total of all his hard-won wisdom. This was a document that people understood had a kind of transcendent value. It alone, I think, has the ambition among the founding documents to bridge the past with the present, with the future. And that also makes it unique.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. We're live on X Spaces simulcast and all of our other channels today, and we're talking with author of Domestic Enemies, the Founding Fathers Fight Against the Left, Daniel Greenfield, about this this ideology that's been around even before the Constitution was signed in our governments, in the individual states, at the local level and at the federal level even. Quite honestly, Daniel, I've learned a lot by reading this book. I think that's why our Spaces host, I had a discussion with him before the show started, and he went and bought the book because it's very enlightening, and it connects the past of America with today, and that's what intrigues me the most about it. You know, George Washington's farewell address. There are college, university classes devoted to the thing, and I think Mr. Avalon is correct in that clip there. It is the one document that bridges the past to the present and all the way across it with some very common sense, wise statements that we should all take very, very seriously. You know, and two of them are the partisan nature of factions and how they can destroy the country, and the other is sectionalism, which if anybody knows what sectionalism is, that was what drove a large part of why violence started occurring in the American Civil War from the outset, and was debated hotly for the 20 years prior to that. So Washington was really on track to, as the father of the country, but also as its first president, actually have a full understanding of where we need to be from a structural perspective and from an ideological perspective, so we don't end up where we're at. Unfortunately, not enough people listened, or not enough people were able to get into power. But one of these guys from early on, I think you called him the founding father of the left, or the hidden founding father of the left, Aaron Burr, who was once a vice president, known probably best for getting in a duel with Alexander Hamilton, and he died. Hamilton died. Was tried for treason and those kind of things. What's the story behind him and really the foundation of the progressive leftist political party that's called the Democrats that we see today?
Well, Aaron Burr is an absolutely fascinating character. He's brilliant. He's very effective, but he's not. But despite his service in the Revolutionary War, it's not his military brilliance that he's really good at. He's really good at politics. And a lot of the founding fathers, obviously, we had this video clip about George Washington. George Washington is absolutely not good at politics. He doesn't want power. He doesn't know what to do with it, and he's not comfortable with the partisan divides. Aaron Burr loves this stuff. That's why I call him the first community organizer. He's really good at exploiting a crisis and exploiting political divisions. He becomes vice president, but he has to settle for being vice president because his original plan is to become president of the United States. And one of the reasons I call him an early leftist is that he's so good at doing what the left does, which is analyzing power, seeing loopholes, seeing any kind of weaknesses in the system. And the 1800 election, which is the first contested presidential election, is really his master course. He sees that there's this transition of power. He sees that Thomas Jefferson is going to need him because Thomas Jefferson needs New York, and Aaron Burr is going to control New York by founding and empowering something called Tammany Hall, which becomes the ultimate political machine. But Aaron Burr goes further because there is a yellow fever outbreak. It results in Philadelphia, the nation's capital, being evacuated. There's a lot of panic in major port cities, and Aaron Burr figures out how he can change election rules, the way that elections are run, using that pandemic, the early pandemic. And what he does is he puts a lot more people on the voting rolls. By doing that, this changes the results in New York. It changes the outcome of the election in general. But then Burr does something very clever, which actually came up in 2020 in a big way, which was it was unclear who would actually be the president, who would actually be the vice president, because they both got the same number of votes in the Electoral College. And he actually generates an election stalemate. He throws the election to Congress, which debates, which is on the brink of civil war, and Burr covertly offers himself up as a compromise candidate. Now, there's a lot of fun history there, including the near civil war, but I think what I want to go back to is the conception of a modern election. Aaron Burr runs really the first modern election, which is why I call him a community organizer. He starts collecting data on people. He creates a bank that is publicly financed that is going to lend them money and then call in favors on election day. He runs the first multicultural campaign. He starts focusing on immigrant outreach. He starts actually transporting people to the polls instead of just assuming they're going to show up there. If ballot harvesting had been legal there, he would have been absolutely doing that. So he really creates the first modern election over 200 years ago, and it's the template that Democrats have been running since then, because they create these urban political machines. They focus on outreach to the people who know the least, who are the least likely to vote. They focus on getting them indebted. They focus on changing election rules, exploiting any kind of crisis. And the result was that Aaron Burr didn't become president. He becomes vice president. Jefferson gives him the boot because he knows exactly what he was up to. And Burr later on, a former vice president, actually offers his services to both France and England to split up the United States and is later on trial for treason.
Wow. So it goes back to Tammany Hall. I mean, most of us that were educated in public school have an understanding of the political Democrat machine that controlled New York and New York City especially. Was this originally one of those secret democratic societies from the French Revolution days, or?
Hall was absolutely a secret society. They made no secret of being a secret society. They had a public membership and a private one. They had a secret constitution and public rules. And it was a criminal organization almost from the very beginning. The list of Tammany Hall people is pretty much a list of people who are going to then go to prison for all sorts of crimes, mostly various kinds of fraud and embezzlement. And they also usher in a different way of having elections. You know, you would go to the polls and vote. Tammany Hall made sure that they were going to decide who was going to actually count the votes. And if there was any dispute on the subject, they had these organized crime thugs that would come in and start fights, and they would steal the ballots in the meantime. So, you know, as bad as the 2020 election was, Tammany Hall elections were even worse. They were so bad that the argument made later on against women voting was that voting was just too violent to allow women to do it.
Well, from their perspective, it seems like it was. So they had a secret constitution and a public constitution in the Tammany organization. I'm assuming like Joe Biden, you know, he's all for liberty and democracy and all that, but what was the secret constitution about?
Well, the secret part remains secret as far as we know. They became a public force in that they actually controlled New York City politics and a lot of New York State politics going into the 20th century. But the basic idea of it was that they were committed to the ideals of the French Revolution in their form. They wanted to create an equal society, remove everything that they considered aristocratic, by which they meant any kind of division. In practice, of course, like any good socialist, they stole a whole lot of money. Their own leaders built incredible mansions for themselves. Meanwhile, the poor people suffered. And they would engage in all kinds of social welfare organizations. In practice, those were dependent on you voting for them. And they knew who voted for who. So if you wanted to get jobs, if you wanted to get money, if you wanted to get any kind of help on Christmas or any time you needed it, you had to make sure to vote for their candidates. If you didn't vote for their candidates, not only would you not get money or jobs, but bad things would happen to you. About 50 years after this, they are effectively dominating organized crime in New York and some other places, which means they control gambling, they control the early gangs, they control brothels, they control even child labor, and all the worst kinds of crimes that you can imagine was also the work of the leading Democratic Party.
Wow. Well, we've got a question over in the live audience. Let's go ahead and take that. Patriot Rob, go ahead.
Chris, go ahead. Chris, are you there?
Thank you, Rob and Colonel. I'm sorry, I had a mic issue there a minute. All this history and, you know, that you're telling us and everything and learning is really, I'm getting your book, by the way, but that's what I see coming at us, all this history repeating itself, and look where we are and look at the things you said in history, and it's just so scary. And what do we do to change it? That's my question.
It's a great question.
So, yeah, it is. And I didn't just write this book to recite history. And there are two messages I think that it's helpful to take away from that. First of all, is that we have been dealing with this for over 200 years. It has been bad, it's been scary at times. Sometimes it's even been worse than this. We have gotten through this. The second thing is going right back to the founding fathers. Some of what we discussed earlier, they were not afraid to fight. They were not afraid to use force. George Washington commands troops in the field at one point. We passed the Alien and Sedition Act specifically to stop the spread of foreign agents inside the country, which gets a bit of a revival with the Communist Control Act when during the Cold War. So they were not afraid to directly confront the left. And part of the problem is we've become very complacent. We're worried about confronting the left. I mean, the Colonel started the show with a clip of Joe Biden. The first time I saw this, I thought he was declaring a coup. He's got soldiers behind him. He's got the red lighting. And the lesson to take away from that is they are absolutely not afraid to do this. You simply challenge them, and they will act like that they can call out the troops. They can militarize D.C. They are not afraid to do this. Whereas Republicans, conservatives are all too often afraid to do this. They're afraid to confront the left. They're afraid to take it on. They're afraid to call this an insurrection and bring out the troops. And the moral of the story, really, from chapter 1 to the conclusion at the end in the draft riots, is when the left actually came after this country, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln were willing to call out the troops. They were willing to take it on. And we don't always have to, call out the troops, but they were willing to pass legislation to crack down on the left severely. And in the 20th century, we've lost the knack for doing that. Hopefully, we wake up in the 21st century before it's too late.
Yeah, we got to take our last break, Daniel. It's a great answer, and I want to dive into it a little bit deeper about the modern American left and how we can use their own tactics and strategies against them, like the founding fathers did. That's what I got out of reading the historical part of the book. Is the Constitution was one of those methodologies that arrested the creation of a French Revolution type of activity and replaced it with a democratic republic that harnessed the American Revolution's actions and activities and turned it into something good before it got out of control. So we'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show live with Daniel Greenfield here at X Spaces Simulcast.
Glutathione, I'm so excited that we have a fantastic delivery system for it, because glutathione is the master detoxifier and master antioxidant. Glutathione's like oxygen. Okay, you will die in 3 to 7 minutes if you don't get glutathione.
Wow.
And 3 to 7 minutes. And we have a way now to get the whole glutathione in your cells in about 90 seconds without using a glutathione IV. It is the most important molecule in your body. Glutathione helps your brain, your liver. It performs 400 functions in your body. So the it will detox every heavy metal, every pesticide, every herbicide. It will detox spike protein from your body. It will detox graphene oxide. And it is the master detoxifier and antioxidant. So glutathione is needed every single day.
Numi.com/house1. Numi.com/house1.
A lot of people are having great success with a weight management program with Bella Trim, but it's just a tool. In terms of ingredients, Chromex or chromium picolinate improves the actions of insulin, so you have better glucose management, and in addition, it promotes fat utilization. Fat utilization or fat burning is also a feature of metabolite, which are two botanicals that stimulate a switch called AMP kinase, and so you tend to burn fat, reduce belly fat or visceral fat. Who doesn't want that? Metabolite has the ability to stimulate satiety or reduce those cravings. That's really very, very important, and it does that by raising GLP-1 levels. In addition, we've addressed the microbiome by using prebiotics. Healthier microbiome, better weight management.
Probably the most common question that I'm asked as a professor at Hillsdale is, what happened to my country? You know, when they poll Americans, they find that a vast majority don't think the world is going to be a better place for their own children. In this course, we're going to look at who the mid-century liberals were and the changes that they introduced into American society. We're also going to look at the radicals, the counterculturalists of the 1960s, and the changes that remain with us today. We're going to look at the group called the neoliberals and the formation of an oligarchy in the American regime in the 1980s and the 1990s. And finally, we'll see how those radicals in the 60s made peace with those neoliberal oligarchs in the Great Awakening in Barack Obama's second term, and the threat that it poses to Republican liberties for us today. These movements are promising to strip away all of the rights and the freedoms that give life happiness and meaning and purpose. I don't think people understand the source of most current ideologies, and what this course is going to show us is where they originated and how they took control of our society. You'll see the changes that have taken place in America, the ideas that are responsible for those changes, and how we as Americans can challenge those ideas and reclaim our American heritage. This is our course on the American left. Let's begin.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Training Tuesday. We're at X Spaces simulcast, and our guest is the author of the new book, Domestic Enemies, The Founding Fathers' Fight Against the Left, Daniel Greenfield. And it's a fascinating book. I have authors on here all the time talking about books, but I very rarely tell people to go buy it. Go buy this book. It has a foundational level of knowledge about what is happening today throughout the history of the very beginnings of our country to the present. That's why I started the show, as Daniel pointed out, with that speech of Joe Biden, because that's where we're at today. And this little clip we just showed, Daniel, I chose it because it really captures everything that's going on today visually and in sound with the left, and how they are trying to take that next step in their creation of a French-style revolution where the state is responsible for making you happy, and you'll be happy at the direction of the state versus what we believe in as Americans, which is the individual right to pursue happiness without interference from the state. And I think that captures that really best. It's daunting, like the questioner asked before the break. What are we to do to resolve this situation and not go back, but to reestablish our democratic republic under the Constitution?
So one of the reasons I wrote this book is, yes, there is such a sense of doom and despair. What can we possibly do about this? And part of that is this idea. Founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution, never faced a crisis like this. They would not have understood it. We're in a completely dark, uncharted territory. And it's important to understand they actually did understand this. As we discussed, as I discussed in Domestic Enemies, they were absolutely aware. They didn't face exactly what we faced. They didn't have all gender restrooms, but they understood the basic concept of what they were dealing with from the left. And the Constitution was actually meant to serve as a defense mechanism. One of the very basic ideas of the left is that they need absolute total political power. They need a large government in order to impose their will on us. You don't have leftist libertarians that want small government. At least you don't have any that survived for very long. They need big government, and the Constitution specifically tried to keep the government as small as possible. The Articles of Confederation tried to keep it even smaller, but that whole system collapsed. So they focused on keeping the government small because the government is going to be less able to wield that kind of direct power over people. They also wanted to avoid political parties. That was one of the themes of George Washington's farewell address. Unfortunately, that battle was lost, and it's probably going to stay lost. But they focused on making sure that there would be as little foothold as possible for this kind of totalitarian system to exist. Unfortunately, we have gone the other way, as the clip kind of suggests. Particularly in the 20th century, really around the Civil War and after the Civil War, we began constructing a massive centralized government in D.C. And also every state became its own form of D.C., which had its own capital or key city. And that key city tends to exert a lot of control over that particular state. When we look at the overall electoral map, you're going to see all the sea of red and a little blue in there. So what the Democrats did, and it's kind of what I was discussing with Aaron Burr, they made cities central to everything. They made cities into the storehouses of power and influence, and they also made sure that power continually traveled upward, never downward. And that's something we absolutely have to reverse, which means going back to the vision of the founding fathers, the framers, as much as possible, is to reduce the size of government. I know in a lot of conservative circles that's a cliche, but as we've actually very, very clearly seen, the left is really inhibited by just the transfer of power. One of the great things that Trump did in his first term was actually take BLM, and by that I don't mean Black Lives Matter, but the Bureau of Land Management, and okay, you guys have to move to Denver. And you know, Denver's a perfectly nice city, but all the people in DC did not want to go to Denver. You start breaking up even just the core centralized government, suddenly a whole bunch of those people don't enjoy that lifestyle. You go to DC, it's the imperial city. It's completely disconnected and detached from everything going on in the rest of the country. So you break up as much of the centralization as possible. This is something Andrew Jackson began doing back in his day. You break up the centralization, you start restoring power to local areas, you're already inhibiting the left. There's obviously a whole lot more that we have to do, but this is just a starting point in terms of what the founding fathers can teach us.
Yeah, you know, the framework they gave us with the Constitution, we've made some changes to it. And I think one of the unfortunate consequences of the Civil War, you mentioned it, was this overpowering centralized federal government that was able to be created by that. Because quite honestly, there were people on both sides of that war that really, I mean, I think most people believed in what we're talking about, the Constitution of the United States, liberty from the perspective of the Declaration of Independence. But the left has weaseled its way through the aftermath of that war and into the early 20th century with the passage of the personal income tax, taking the ability to elect senators by the states to down to the people, so they're the same as the House of Representatives. And I think those three things really gave pathways to the left that were not intended, but they took them. And we've got to find our pathways and stand up. I mean, like you said, the founding fathers understood what they were dealing with. This is an ongoing conflict that will continue to go on, I think, and we have to constantly be on guard against it and try to reverse the gains they make. Is that right?
We absolutely do. We have to reverse the gains. We have to push back as hard as possible. We have to identify their strengths, our weaknesses. The left is very good at doing that. We have to actually turn their strengths into weaknesses, and one of their strengths is the centralizing power of government. You know, one of the ways as an army you go after an enemy is you destroy its supply chain, you destroy its sources of support. The left would not exist without a huge centralized government and a whole lot of money flowing from out of it. And that is still really their weakness. It's the one point that we have to repeatedly attack over and over again.
Their centers of gravity is what we call it in the Air Force. Attack their centers of gravity, which is their centers of power, and go after that. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for coming on and spending this time with us to talk about the book. What are your coordinates on the internet, and where can folks buy the book at? Because I've got a lot of requests here in my DMs about that.
Oh, I have the honor of working for David Horowitz at the David Horowitz Freedom Center at frontpagemag.com, and you can get the book on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, any store that sells books online. It should be there.
Well, thank you very much. This book is a blessing to the American people, my friend. I appreciate it. Hope to have you back again sometime on the show. We can talk about even more of what the crazy left is doing, because they're crazy, folks. And tomorrow's Whistleblower Wednesday, and we're going to talk about what DEI is doing to the military. And we're going to talk through that video that came out from James O'Keefe just a week ago or so, where he identified the chief petty officer advisor on DEI to the chief of naval operations. Should be a fascinating discussion, and I'll see you then right here on the Rob Maness Show.